glow beyond the trees. I was in Yogyakarta, Indonesia, chasing a ghost. Not a literal ghost, not at first, anyway. I'm a freelance journalist with a knack for chasing leads that most people would brush off. Haunted houses, UFO sightings, cryptids lurking in rural woodlands, these were my bread and butter. If someone claimed they saw a ghost in their bathroom or a demon at the edge of their cornfield, chances were I'd end up on their doorstep with a recorder and notebook. It paid just enough to keep me floating. And when a colleague tipped me off about a string of disappearances in a remote Javanese village, a place so isolated it barely showed up on Google Maps, I booked the next flight out. The locals, I was told, whispered of something ancient, something that stalked the forested hills under the light of the moon. That was all I needed to hear. If nothing else, it sounded like good material for a feature piece. Yogyakarta was humid and alive, a riot of colors, sounds, and smells that hit me like a wall the moment I stepped off the plane. The streets were crowded with motorbikes, their engines humming like angry insects, and the air carried the sweet tang of fried tempeh mingled with the acrid bite of exhaust. I spent a day in the city gathering my bearings, exchanging pleasantries with shopkeepers, and getting the lay of the land. But I wasn't there to sip kopi jaws at street-side cafes or admire the ancient temples. My focus was the village of Kemuning, tucked away in the misty folds of Mount Merapi's foothills. It wasn't an easy place to reach. I had to hire a local guide, a wiry man named Pak Wallen who spoke just enough English to get by. He'd been reluctant when I first approached him. Kemuning, he said, his brow furrowing as he rubbed his stubbly chin. Bad place. People disappear there. Locals don't go. That's exactly why I need to go, I said, trying to mask my impatience. I'd heard these kinds of warnings before. Every town with a ghost story had its superstitions, its rumors meant to scare off outsiders. I'll pay double your usual rate. He hesitated for a long moment, his dark eyes searching mine as if trying to gauge whether I truly understood what I was asking for. Finally, he nodded. Okay. But you listen to me. We don't stay after dark. You hear me? Not 1 minute. I agreed, though I'd already planned to press my luck. The best stories always happen after dark. The road to Kemuning was barely a road at all. It snaked through dense jungle, little more than a narrow dirt path gouged into the earth. The further we went, the thicker the vegetation became, pressing in on either side like a living, breathing thing. Massive banyan trees loomed overhead, their gnarled roots spilling across the ground like the fingers of some buried giant. The air grew cooler, heavier, and filled with the chirping of unseen insects. By the time we arrived, the sun was a pale smear on the horizon, half hidden behind the rolling green hills. Kemuning was smaller than I'd expected, just a cluster of wooden houses with sagging roofs and peeling paint. Chickens wandered freely through the dirt streets, and a few villagers glanced our way as we approached. Their expressions were wary, their eyes shadowed. They know why we're here, Wallen murmured. They don't like it. What exactly do they think is happening? I asked, pulling out my notebook. The disappearances, I mean. He hesitated, his hands tightening on the steering wheel. You'll hear the stories. But remember, they're just stories. Don't believe everything. We parked near what I assumed was the village center, a dusty open space where a few wooden benches had been arranged around a large banyan tree. I noticed a withered shrine at its base, draped in colorful cloth and littered with offerings, flower petals, fruit, even a few coins. An elderly man approached us as we climbed out of the jeep. His back was slightly hunched, and he leaned on a wooden staff as he walked. His face was lined like cracked earth, but his eyes were sharp and alert. Pak Wallen, he said, his voice gravelly. They spoke in rapid-fire Javanese, too fast for me to catch more than a word here and there. Then the old man turned to me, his gaze sweeping over me with a mix of curiosity and suspicion. "This is Pak Surya," Wallen said. "He's the village head." "Tell him I'm here to help," I said, forcing a smile. "I want to write about what's happening here. Maybe bring some attention to it." Wallen translated, and Surya's expression darkened. He barked something in response, jabbing his staff toward the jungle beyond the village. "He says you shouldn't have come," Wallen said. "He says the forest doesn't like outsiders." I frowned. "The forest?" Wallen hesitated, then sighed. "In this village, they believe the forest is alive. That it's angry. They say it takes people who don't respect it." Over the next few hours, I spoke with a handful of villagers, though most were reluctant to say much. They told me about the disappearances in hushed voices, their eyes darting nervously to the tree line as if afraid the forest might overhear. A young woman named Sari told me her brother had vanished just 2 weeks ago. He'd gone to gather firewood and never returned. They found his machete the next morning, lying on the ground at the forest's edge. Nothing else. An older man claimed he'd seen shadows moving among the trees at night, tall and thin with glowing eyes. "Not human," he whispered, his hands trembling. "Something else." The strangest account came from a boy no older than 10, who said he'd heard singing coming from the jungle late at night. He described it as soft and sweet, like a lullaby. When I asked if he'd gone to investigate, his mother cut in sharply, shaking her head. "No. He knows better. That's how they get you. They call to you, and you follow." "Who calls to you?" I asked. Her face went pale. "Don't ask questions you don't want the answers to," she said. By the time dusk fell, most of the villagers had retreated into their homes, shutting their doors and windows tight. Even the chickens had disappeared, leaving the streets eerily empty. Wallen was growing increasingly agitated, glancing at his watch every few minutes. "We need to go," he said. "Now." "Just 1 more hour," I said. "I want to check out the forest." He grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong. "You don't understand. This is not a joke. We need to leave before dark." Something in his tone gave me pause. I'd never seen him so rattled. But I was stubborn, and the thought of walking away empty-handed after coming this far was unbearable. "I'll be quick," I said, pulling free. "Wait for me here." He cursed under his breath, but didn't try to stop me. Instead, he climbed into the jeep and slammed the door, muttering to himself in Javanese. The forest was darker than I'd expected, the canopy so thick it blotted out what little light remained. I picked my way carefully along a narrow trail, my flashlight cutting weak beams through the gloom. The air was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of moss and decay. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. I'd barely gone 50 yards when I saw it, a small clearing up ahead, bathed in an eerie, silvery light. As I stepped closer, I realized the light was coming from hundreds of tiny, glowing orbs hovering in the air. They looked like fireflies, but their glow was steady and unnatural, casting long, shifting shadows across the ground. In the center of the clearing stood a figure. At first, I thought it was a person, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized it was something else entirely. Its limbs were too long, its posture too rigid. Its head tilted unnaturally to one side, as if listening to something I couldn't hear. Then it turned toward me. I froze as the figure's head jerked toward me. My flashlight wavered in my hand, its beam cutting weakly through the oppressive dark. The figure stood perfectly still, bathed in the faint silver light of the glowing orbs. It was tall, unnaturally so, its limbs long and spindly like the bare branches of a tree. Its face was obscured by the shadows, but I could feel its attention on me, cold and piercing, like a hand gripping my throat. The air grew heavy, suffocating. A low hum began to emanate from the clearing, vibrating in my chest like the drone of an ancient, unseen instrument. It wasn't loud, but it was all-encompassing, filling the space around me and within me. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps as I stumbled back a step, then another. I had seen strange things in my years chasing stories, but this was different. This wasn't folklore or rumor. This was real, and it was wrong in a way I couldn't put into words. "Wowan," I whispered, but my voice barely carried over the sound. My mind raced, grasping for logic, for reason, for anything that would explain what I was seeing. A trick of the light? A prank? A hallucination brought on by exhaustion? But no matter how I turned it over in my mind, nothing fit. The figure was there, undeniable and alien, a thing that shouldn't exist. The figure took a step forward. Its movements were jerky, stilted, as though it were a marionette pulled along by invisible strings. The orbs of light pulsed in time with its steps, brightening and dimming in an unsettling rhythm. I could hear the faint crunch of leaves beneath its feet, the sound somehow amplified in the oppressive silence. Each step it took seemed to warp the space around it, as if the world itself recoiled from its presence. "Stop," I managed to choke out, though I knew how absurd it was to think it would listen. My hand fumbled for the knife I packed in my bag, but my fingers felt clumsy and numb, like they didn't belong to me. My heart hammered in my chest, and I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck, cold and clammy. The figure stopped at the edge of the clearing, just outside the reach of my flashlight beam. For a moment, it simply stood there, its head tilted to one side, as though studying me. Then, slowly, it raised an arm and pointed toward the forest behind me. I didn't need to turn around to know something was there. The hum grew louder, more insistent, and the air seemed to vibrate with a low, resonant energy. The shadows around me shifted, lengthened, as if alive. A voice drifted through the air, soft and melodic, the same lullaby the boy in the village had described. It was beautiful, heartbreakingly so, and yet it filled me with a primal, bone-deep terror. It was the kind of sound that didn't belong in this world, that made you want to cover your ears and run, but also lured you in, compelling you to follow. "No," I whispered, shaking my head as if that would dispel the sound. My legs felt weak, unsteady, but I forced myself to turn, my flashlight cutting a feeble arc through the darkness. The trees pressed in close, their gnarled roots and branches twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed to writhe and shift in the flickering light. For a moment, I saw nothing but the dense foliage, the thick shadows pooling between the trunks. Then I saw her. She stood just beyond the reach of the light, her form indistinct and cloaked in shadow. Her hair was long and tangled, hanging in dark, wet strands over her shoulders. Her face was obscured, but I could feel her eyes on me, sharp and unrelenting. The song came from her lips, though her mouth didn't move. It echoed through the forest, carried on the air like a living thing. I took an involuntary step back, my heel catching on a root, and I stumbled. My flashlight wobbled, its beam sliding over the forest floor. The light caught on something gleaming at her feet, a blade. No, not just a blade. It was a machete, its handle worn and familiar. Sari's brother. The realization hit me like a blow to the chest, and my mind rebelled against it. "Leave," I said, though the word came out more as a whimper. My voice felt small, insignificant, against the weight of the forest and the presence within it. "Whoever you are, whatever this is, just leave me alone." She took a step forward. Her movements were smooth, almost gliding, in stark contrast to the jerky, unnatural gait of the figure in the clearing. The song grew louder, more insistent, wrapping around me like invisible chains. My legs felt heavy, as though the ground itself was trying to hold me in place. And then I saw her face. It was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. Her features were human enough, eyes, nose, mouth, but they were twisted, elongated, as though someone had taken a human face and stretched it like clay. Her eyes were too large, too dark, and they seemed to pulse with an inner light, a sickly yellow glow that flickered like a dying flame. Her mouth hung open, too wide, as if unhinged, revealing rows of teeth that were sharp and uneven, like broken glass. She opened her mouth wider, and the song stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, a void that pressed against my ears and chest. For a moment, nothing moved, nothing breathed. Then she screamed. It wasn't a human scream. It was a sound ripped from the depths of some ancient, unknowable place, a raw, primal wail that seemed to split the very fabric of reality. The trees around me shuddered, their branches whipping violently as though caught in a hurricane. The glowing orbs flickered and died, plunging the clearing into darkness. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back. I just ran, my feet pounding the uneven ground, my lungs burning with each ragged breath. The forest seemed alive, its roots and branches clawing at me, trying to pull me back. The hum was everywhere now, a constant, oppressive presence that made my head throb and my vision blur. My flashlight swung wildly in my hand, its beam illuminating fleeting glimpses of the trees, the shadows, and the figure that moved among them. I burst out of the trees and into the village, collapsing onto the dusty ground. The houses were dark, their windows shuttered tight. Wallen's Jeep was still parked in the center of the village, but he was nowhere to be seen. The village was silent, eerily so, the kind of silence that presses against your skin and fills your mind with static. "Wallen!" I shouted, my voice hoarse. "Wallen, we need to go. Now!" There was no answer. The Jeep's door was open, the keys still in the ignition. I stumbled toward it, every instinct screaming at me to leave, to put as much distance between myself and the forest as possible. My hands trembled as I climbed into the driver's seat and turned the key. The engine sputtered to life with a reluctant roar, and I slammed my foot on the gas, the tires kicking up dust as I sped down the dirt road. As the village disappeared behind me, I risked a glance in the rearview mirror. My stomach turned to ice. Standing at the edge of the trees was the figure, its head tilted, its arm raised in a silent farewell. Behind it, deeper in the forest, I could just make out the faint, flickering glow of yellow eyes watching me go. I didn't stop driving until I reached the outskirts of Yogyakarta. The city lights shimmered in the distance, a hazy promise of safety, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every shadow that flickered across the road, every sway of the jungle trees in my peripheral vision, made my pulse spike. My knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and the Jeep's engine groaned as I pushed it harder than it was meant to go. When I finally pulled into the city, I parked on a crowded street near a row of food stalls. The sights and sounds of normal life surrounded me, the sizzle of frying oil, the chatter of families, the honk of motorbikes weaving through traffic. But it all felt distant, like I was watching it through a thick pane of glass. My legs wobbled as I climbed out of the Jeep, and I had to steady myself against the door to keep from collapsing. I needed to tell someone, anyone, what had happened. But who would believe me? I barely believed it myself. The forest, the figure, the woman, it all felt like a fever dream, a surreal nightmare that I'd somehow stumbled into and barely escaped. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, and dialed Wallen's number. It rang and rang, but there was no answer. I tried again. Nothing. My stomach churned. Where was he? Had he gone back to the forest? Or had something followed him, the way it felt like something had followed me? I leaned against the Jeep, staring down at the phone in my hand, my thoughts a chaotic swirl. That's when I noticed the dirt. It was smeared across the sleeve of my jacket and caked under my fingernails, dark and sticky. At first, I thought it was just mud from the forest, but as I looked closer, a cold dread settled over me. It wasn't dirt. It was ash. Blackened and gritty, with a faint, acrid smell that made my stomach turn. I tore off the jacket and threw it into the back of the Jeep, suddenly unable to stand the sight of it. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. The forest had been alive with that oppressive hum, the strange orbs of light, the screeching wail of a woman. But fire? No, there hadn't been fire. At least, not that I'd seen. Unless it had come afterward. The next morning, I went to the police. It was a desperate move, and I knew it. I'd spent years chasing strange stories, and the one thing I'd learned was that authority figures never took them seriously. But Wowen was missing, and the ash on my jacket felt like a warning I couldn't ignore. The station was small and crowded, a bustling hub of activity that smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and coffee. I waited in line, clutching my notebook like a lifeline, until a tired-looking officer finally waved me over. His badge read Horace. "What can I help you with?" he asked, his tone polite but distracted. I hesitated. How could I explain any of this without sounding insane? I think someone's missing, I said finally. A local guide. His name is Wowen. He didn't come back from a trip we took to communing. At the mention of communing, Horace's expression changed. His polite detachment hardened into something colder, sharper. Communing, he repeated, his voice low. Why were you there? I'm a journalist, I said quickly, pulling out my press badge. I was following up on reports of disappearances. Wowen was my guide, but something happened. I don't know how to explain it, but he's gone. And I think it's connected to whatever's been happening in that village. Horace leaned back in his chair, studying me with an unreadable expression. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. Then he stood and gestured for me to follow. Wait here, he said, leading me to a small, windowless room at the back of the station. I sat at the table, the fluorescent light overhead buzzing faintly. The walls were bare, the air stale. Minutes ticked by, and my anxiety grew. Finally, Horace returned, carrying a thin folder. He set it on the table and slid it toward me. Communing, he said again, as though the word itself was a warning. This is what we know. I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, grainy and faded, showing dense jungle and shadowy clearings. One photo caught my eye immediately, the banyan tree in the center of the village. Its twisted roots and gnarled branches were unmistakable, but there was something off about the image. The shrine at its base was broken, the offerings scattered. The tree itself seemed darker, almost blackened, as though it had been scorched by fire. What happened to it? I asked, looking up at Horace. It's been that way for years, he said. Ever since the first disappearance. The villagers say it's a bad place, cursed. They call it the forest's heart. And the disappearances? Horace hesitated, then flipped through the folder and pulled out a map. It showed the village and the surrounding forest, with red X's marking various locations. These are where we found remains, he said, his voice heavy. Not all of the missing have been found, but the ones who were, it's not something I wish on anyone. My stomach churned as I stared at the map. The X's formed a rough circle, all clustered around the village. Do you have any idea what's causing it? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Horace's gaze darkened. There are stories, he said. Superstitions. The villagers believe the forest is alive, that it punishes those who disrespect it. They speak of a spirit, a guardian, something ancient and vengeful. They call it the Pingdani Jelip, the Dark Dweller. A chill ran down my spine. And you? What do you believe? Horace didn't answer. Instead, he closed the folder and stood. If you value your life, you'll stay away from communing, he said. Some things are better left alone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Horace's words echoed in my mind, intertwining with the memories of the forest, the figure, and the woman. I kept the lights on in my hotel room, the curtains drawn tight, but it did little to ease my unease. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant car horn, made me jump. Around midnight, I heard it. A soft, melodic hum drifting through the air like a lullaby. My breath hitched, and I sat up, my heart pounding. It was faint, almost too quiet to hear, but unmistakable. The same song I'd heard in the forest. I crept to the window, my hand shaking as I pulled the curtain aside. The street below was empty, bathed in the yellow glow of the streetlights. Nothing moved. But the song continued, growing louder, more insistent. I turned back to the room and froze. The woman was standing in the corner, her head tilted, her glowing yellow eyes fixed on me. I reached for my phone, my fingers trembling, and dialed the police station. Horace answered, his voice groggy. "What is it?" he muttered. "She's here," I whispered, my voice cracking. She followed me. The line went silent. Then, Horace spoke, his voice low and resigned. "It's too late." The woman's mouth opened, impossibly wide, revealing rows of jagged teeth. Her song filled the room, deafening now, pulling me toward her as the world around me seemed to dissolve. The last thing I saw was her eyes, burning bright in the darkness. As everything else faded into nothing,